Hey everybody, today I'm doing something new. This will be part 1 working on my piece for the Crafting for Hope art challenge. This charity fundraiser is in support of childhood cancer research, a cause that's very near and dear to me. Shocking no one, this video will be showing how I made this thing. It's a tree! Ta-da! Having never made a tree before, I watched dozens of tutorials on here and landed on one by Geordie Crafts. I've included links to both her video as well as information on Crafting for Hope down below. And with that said, I'm Jared. Just for fun, let's get to making this tree. To make this tree, we gotta first build its core, and to do that, I'm using wire. This is 22 gauge 16-inch floral flower stem wire. I got a pack of 300 off Amazon for pretty cheap and used about half. Split off 5 small bundles, not really bothering to make them even. Taking one of the bundles, I'm adding a 90-degree bend a couple inches up. This will eventually become our roots. Taking one of the wires, wrap it tightly around to hold things in place. And then do the same for the longer side. I used 2 wires, but I think one would have done the trick just fine. Rinse and repeat for each of the bundles. With all the L's made, we can bunch the bunches back together using a free wire to hold these loosely in place, and making sure to splay the roots out in the directions you'll want them down the line. And before we start the branches, make sure to bend the trunk into whatever shape you want the tree to have. Now we can start splitting off the branches from the trunk, and smaller branches from those branches. At first, I'm wrapping these smaller branches together like we did back at the start, but I think giving them a good twist would have been easier at this point. Now, I want this tree to look natural, and nature is often chaotic, so I'm trying not to divide the wires evenly when adding another split. And at this point I realized I wanted more branches on the right side, so I'm just wrapping in another bundle. And now back to splitting and twisting. So much twisting. I'm not worried about the look just yet, so once I get a set of branches done, I'm just folding them out of the way. And since this isn't a weeping willow, it's time for a haircut. Still not happy with the amount of branches, I'm adding another bundle. Securing this one was a bit trickier with all the branches in the way. Once this final branch is all twisted, I realized I need to snip off a bit more from each wire. Now to take a look at the roots. To better twist and split them, I unwound the wires initially holding the bundles in place and got to work. I'm not sure how much of the roots will be visible in the final project, but I wanted to give myself enough to work with, as well as giving the tree a nice base to stand on in the meantime. And now that my acupuncture session is over and the energies in my fingers are all aligned, we can move on to the bark. For this, I'm using hot glue. It's fast, it's cheap, and will let the branches hold on to some flexibility when finished, which comes in handy quite a bit. Just do your best to cover the entire tree in glue. I found it easiest to work on one branch at a time. It's a little harder to lose track of where I still have to put glue that way. This is definitely one of those trust the process moments. Now, before moving on to the roots, I'm going to take a moment and clean all the hot glue cobwebs in the branches away. Now, isn't that just the fanciest goop tree you ever did see? Quick PSA, hot glue is hot. Be careful when using it. After a quick trip to the store to restock on glue sticks, we can finally get to those roots. And a final detail with the glue, I'm building up a large knot in the trunk. Now to add the bark details. All the videos I've seen said to use a wood burning tool on the lowest setting, but all I had was my soldering iron, and this thing gets hot. Do not touch. I speak from experience. So setting it on as low a temp as it will go, I start carving in vertical lines all over the tree. I don't know if a wood burning tool is much cooler than a soldering iron, but this thing was smoking and burning the glue right away. I pretty quickly decided it was probably best to throw on my respirator for this part. As I'm working, I'm also using the tool to kind of smooth out any weird globs of glue on the thinner branches. And lastly, I broke out this little wire brush tool. Not sure if it made any noticeable difference after painting, but it sure did help clean up any remaining glue cobwebs. Bringing out my airbrush, I'm giving the whole thing a good couple coats of black primer. I then mixed up a dark purplish brown and sprayed it over most of the black. Moving on to the brushes, I'm really just winging it. I brought out all my browns and tans and created several washes and just started throwing paint on there. My first pass was a little too bright and orange for me, so I went over it all with a much darker wash, and while everything was still wet, I just kind of dabbed on various mixes of browns and a mossy green here and there, and then let it dry overnight. Using a cheap makeup brush, I'm dry brushing on gradually lighter shades of brown. And this is where all those little details start to pop. And then using a smaller brush to get the finer details, like the knot. And now here's a spooky tree fit for a graveyard. You can see some areas where I needed more hot glue to cover the wire bumps underneath, but since this is the back, I'm not too worried. Now to add some life to our tree, I'm using some preserved moss I picked up at my local hobby store. Using some super glue, I'm breaking off some moss and sticking it onto the ends of the branches. Now this won't hold it in place too well, so I found it easiest to work from the inside out to avoid knocking any moss off. A lot of tree guides on YouTube show them using this stuff called seafoam trees to bulk out the foliage, and it looks great. But that stuff's not cheap and would have taken way too long to ship to me, so I had to improvise. Laying down my giant plastic tarp that I have for some reason, we can work on locking this moss in place. And giving everything a good soaking with isopropyl alcohol first will help the glue soak in instead of just beating up on top. Using a watered down mixture of Mod Podge, I want to fully soak every clump of moss. But my cheap spray bottle clogged, so I grabbed a pipette and kept going. Now this won't lock in everything, but it should solidify the core of the moss clumps and keep them from falling off as easily. And once that's dried, I sprayed on some varnish to work as a light adhesive and started sprinkling on some loose foam flocking. And now with a new spray bottle, we repeat the IPA plus Mod Podge routine. I then stuck on some darker clump foliage to bulk up areas I think looked a little too flat. And more IPA and Mod Podge. This time, I actually have the nozzle twisted to the right spot to get a mist and not a single stream of glue. Now, pulling the colors together a little, I add one more sprinkling of that loose flocking I used at the start. And then really drench the clumps with more watered down Mod Podge. I don't want these leaves going anywhere. Leaving it to dry overnight, we now have a darn good looking tree if I do say so myself. Now, this would look good in any project, but I'm planning to make an enchanted forest, so this tree needs a little something more. To add that extra detail, I'm using some Spanish moss to make vines, as well as these realistic miniature leaves I found online. So mixing some brown paint and Mod Podge, I coated single strands of moss and then sprinkled on the leaves, but I forgot to record that part. However, you can see the finished vines drying in the corner while I glue on several individual leaves to the tree. The leaves will add a bit more color and texture variation, which I think adds a lot in the end. And while hunting for materials, I came across these plastic flowers in the discount bin. I wasn't sure how I would use them, but they were cheap. And I did realize that the flowers could be popped right off. With a dip into Mod Podge, I'm just pressing them into any spot I see fit. And now that our vines are dry, we can glue them on as the final touch. And with that, we're done here. Thank you so much for watching, and make sure to stay tuned for the next part of this charity project. Make sure to check out Crafting for Hope, link down below, and consider donating if you're able. I'll see you in the next one. Okay, bye!